Hello and welcome to Wizardology. This is Amir Fasihi. In this podcast, I'll be talking to game industry experts about leadership and teamwork. Amir Rao, thank you very much for being on this show.
Yes, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Amir, before we start and talk about teamwork and leadership, I have to say huge congratulations on the magnificent success of Hades. And you guys have done a great job in the past 10 years and have been inspirations for many teams. And I wanted to really congratulate you on that before we start.
Oh, thank you very much. No, we really appreciate it. We feel really lucky to be able to have sort of stuck together for all those years, and the same team that worked on Bastion is still here. That same core team is still working on all our games all the way up through Transistor, Pyre, and Hades.
So, Amir, let's start with some history. What was your first leadership role in video games?
It was at Supergiant Games. So my history in games, I was a level designer at Electronic Arts Los Angeles, where I worked on Command & Conquer 3, Red Alert 3, and the expansion pack for Red Alert 3. I had no leadership role at all. I made maps and missions and worked as a kind of content designer there, just on stuff. I was the most junior designer on the team, I think, and it was sort of my first game job coming out of school. So in 2009, I was talking to some people there, and we ended up starting our own company, Supergiant Games, in the living room of my dad's house, and we slowly built the team as me and the co-founder, Gavin Simon, and then we grew from the 2 of us to 7 of us over the course of our first project, Bastion. So my first leadership role was Supergiant. I had worked with a lot of inspiring leaders at Electronic Arts. Everyone from the production staff, executive producers. One of the producers there was actually Greg Kasavin, who would later be Supergiant's creative director. But I had a lot of good leadership there, and good managers there. So my first sort of encounter with video game leadership was not as a leader, but just, having served under some really, really strong leaders there.
That is something that I would like to talk to you about a little bit further. But what was the biggest challenge for you, Amir, when you, from a creative person, when you switched to setting up, running Supergiant, and then you had to do other work other than just level design? Do you remember your main challenges back then?
A lot of the early stuff on Bastion, because the group of us were so strong together, and I had worked with some of them before. A lot of the challenge was just coordinating all the different pieces that we were working on. But I did that and made those decisions in collaboration with other people. It wasn't like I had to make them all myself. So a lot of the change was more, I would say, due to the size of the team. At EA, our team was like 100 and something people, I think, at its height, and smaller when it wasn't right before ship or whatever. But at Supergiant, we were so small, so we felt very fast and very nimble and able to make experiences that were very personal to us. But it also meant that we had to be very, very cognizant of our constraints, and as a small team, try to try to make decisions that we could actually achieve and accomplish as a small group and get to all the little things that we wanted to put into the game when we were working on our first game, Bastion. Over time, I think my job has changed. So on Hades, on Bastion, I made half the levels and tuned all the weapons and the upgrades and stuff like that. And Greg made the other half of the levels, and Gavin did a lot of the game design on that game as well. So 3 of us kind of were responsible for game design stuff. By the time we got to Hades, the team started at 12 and then grew to sort of 17 people, I think, before 1.0. And there was more leadership responsibilities for me, more team coordination, more guidance, more reviews of work and that kind of stuff, more typical, I think, sort of game leadership role stuff. But I've always kept my role on the game, so I still tune the game. So, I tune all the weapons and upgrades and progression and boons and all the stuff that was in Hades. And so I think at a small studio, it's really common that you have multiple jobs. And my jobs at Supergiant are game tuning, work coordination and kind of leadership, and then I do less of this now, but it's external partnership, talking to people outside the team. So those are kind of the 3 big areas I had on Hades. And I think one of the things that connected me to the leadership work is that I work on the thing alongside the people who also work on it. So there's I get to do creative work that I really, really enjoy, and I've refined what I do on the game to be a smaller and smaller piece of it, but it's still a piece of it that I really, really like. So a lot of my leadership growth has been in taking the pleasures that I have working on creative and design work and trying to apply that point of view to leadership, because leadership doesn't have to be non-creative in some way. It doesn't have to be a set of responsibilities that pulls you away from the work you want to do. It's possible that those things don't have to be in competition, or at least I hoped that they didn't have to be in competition. And so a lot of my own growth as a leader or as a person working on games with really, really strong peers has just been in understanding what I'm supposed to be doing and how to do it, and how to do it in a way that's creatively fulfilling.
Mm-hmm. How important do you think it is for a game studio leader to do actual creative work also?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think probably that's impossible for teams of a certain scale. I don't know. I would hesitate to say it's important that any studio have a certain composition or have a certain methodology. My own view on this is that I feel like I only really have opinions about what to do on smaller teams, even though I've worked on bigger ones. Sorry, 1 second. So, for me, with a small team, what's been really important is just to make sure that whatever we're doing is specific to the people who are doing it. So we don't, for example, make games by coming up with an idea and making sure we have the people to do them. We make games that are based on the strengths of the people there and their preoccupations and interests and stuff like that. So that means also our processes and our leadership kind of point of view has to be idiosyncratic to the people that are there. It's based on the small group of people that are there. So what's going to work in one place, or the type of leader that one place is going to need among a really small group, is going to be really different among another small group, because they'll have come together for different reasons and have different values and different relationships and different chemistry. So I think whatever it is you do needs to be really specific to that group and how that group likes to work and how that group does its best work. And because we've worked together over multiple games now at Supergiant, I would say even the stuff we did at the beginning is quite different than the stuff we do now. And that's not just due to the growth of the team size, but just we change as people. And so we kind of reorganize how we work on every project. The level of, design or technical work I do is much lower than it used to be before, but it's also much more specific. So it's an example of a way that we've reorganized on every project.
You have probably found the most important parts of the game where you can have the biggest impact, maybe via experience. Huh?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think also I found something that makes sense. So the thing about tuning as a design craft is that you really just have to keep playing the thing over and over and over again. And so a lot of my work is review of other people's work. And so it gives me an opportunity to kind of do multiple things at once, where I can try different stuff. In a game like Hades, I can go start a run over and see if it's coming together in some way. I can jump into a save game where someone has provided me an iteration on a boss battle. And I end up just finding so many things and so many issues in my own work that it ends up being like a really efficient process as being the thing I do, as opposed to, and I think we've all felt this as leaders sometimes, or just people who work on games, where you have jobs that are very dissimilar. Like the type of work you do in one area can be quite unrelated feeling to the type of work you do in another. It's not to say I don't have those things, like we still have basic company stuff where, I'm signing contracts or reviewing something more operational that has less to do with the work on the game. But if you can start to bring them together or bring them under the same perspective or point of view, suddenly when your mind is working on problems in the background, it's kind of like working on everything. So there's a kind of efficiency that can be gained out of that over time, which can be pleasurable also.
How do you divide your time, Amir, between creative work and being a leader and talking to others and attending to others? Do you have specific routines for that, or is it more ad hoc as things come by?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a system. I think it's always been based on the contour of the project, where we are. There's times when stuff really needs a review more than it needs me to go into the game and tune it, or there's times when people really need more interactions or someone to work through their problems more with them, or there's times when the best thing you can do is answer an email. That'll be the most important thing for the whole team, is to get back to someone on a question they have from outside the team. And I think the prevailing feeling I have, and maybe people who have multiple roles on a team can relate to it, is that I always feel like I'm doing some job to the level it needs to be done, but some of these other roles maybe I'm doing them in a less engaged way. And maybe it's okay for the part of the project that we're in that I'm doing them in a less engaged way. But if part of your work is leadership or coordination or production or any of those things, there's probably always something you can be doing. But that's also true of design, and that's also true of everything. So I wouldn't even say it's a balance, because I guess what I'm describing is it's actually quite out of balance. At any given moment, it's quite uneven. I'm not doing equal parts of it, but maybe over the course of a year or something I am. So it's just the case that sometimes I'm really in one space or really in another.
Are you a good motivator for your team?
It's a good question. I think that you would probably have to ask them. Probably for me, I think at Supergiant, I'm lucky to work with people who are very self-motivated, and I'm part of a leadership team, so I'm not the only leader. The people who have been there from the start are still part of leadership here, whether it's art leadership or technical leadership or creative leadership or any of those types of things. So I'm very lucky because I don't have to figure out all the problems myself. I just am a part of the solution and a part of bringing the right people together to help figure things out. We're a really problem-solving oriented studio. When it comes to motivation, I think we tend to be surrounded by people who are really, really self-motivated. And so, it's more the case that it's less the case that there is a motivational sort of component to the work, I would say, which could also mean I'm ignoring the motivational component to the work or something like that, or maybe I'm not as engaged with it. But from my perspective, a lot of what, like, I'm surrounded by people who excel at solving problems in creative ways. So a lot of what I end up having to do, I feel like, or what I view my role as, is making sure we're just like looking at the right things in the right order. And so, you know, the group, as a group and as individuals, is highly motivated to kind of work together and iterate on stuff and all that kind of thing. So it feels really uncommon, I think, that our leadership has to provide motivation. It's very common that our leadership has to still provide inspiration or guidance or something like that, where we have to talk about what we're trying to achieve or what the goals of a project are or what the goals of a system or a feature might be. But even that is collaborative, because the team is too small for people not to find something that they love in the game that they then want to achieve in it or reflect on it. And some of that can come from us, but it really has to come from them, because for a project on a small team to feel personal and like people made it, and for someone to get kind of wrapped up in their own creative problems, it really has to come from within more than someone give it to you. And so we're quite lucky to have a team that's, I think, highly motivated and good at bringing their influences and perspectives to problems, or good at finding the thread in there that's interesting for them.
Well, that's a very important thing that you said, having a team that are self-motivated. Probably the best thing that any team can have. But as I have studied about your company and you, many of the team members are people that you knew from a long time ago. So you've brought them all in. And it's very important. Apparently you have seen something in those people and thought to yourself, these are going to be good teammates for my team. And you brought them in, right? What are some of those things that you see in people you saw in your fantastic team members, or things that you might be looking for today if you want to add new people to your team, which, well, one of the advantages of that, or one of the things that you see in them, is probably this self-motivation and this fire inside to do something. But how do you see this? How were you able to select this team?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm going to give probably a really non-answer to this, which is, I think I think it would be really hard for me to say, here are the qualities that we look for in a team member, and say like, oh, it's these three things. And then we try to see that reflected in all the people who have joined or have kind of come back to us. What actually I've seen is more that here are people that I valued personally, the original members of the Bastion team. And they're people that I connected with personally and I thought were extraordinary talents. Like our audio director, Darren Korb. I've known him since I was like 8 or something years old. And same with Logan, the principal voice actor for all of our games, who was the voice of the narrator in Bastion and other key roles, voice of Lord Hades and stuff. I've known them since I was young. I've always known them to be talented, artistic people. And so when I thought to do something that had any kind of creative thing, I thought of them immediately because I love them, I'm friends with them, and I also think that they're really, really talented. So, that's true of the people who I worked with. Like, I worked with Gavin at EA. I knew he was really good. I'd worked on a ton of problems with him. I knew his perspective was totally different than mine, and that it worked together really well. Often we want people who have a different point of view than us, but the key thing is we want people who have a different point of view with us that we can still communicate with, and have that kind of like bridge any of those gaps. And so I feel really lucky and blessed to have sort of known so many talented people. And, you know, the leap when you do this is, so I like this person, or I love this person, or I see the value in them. Now will the others. And we've been really lucky that we've been able to make that work, that this same sort of core group of us has been able to make that work for so long. So, you know, that part is great, and it not to be taken for granted, for sure. The other part, of course, is that in any position beyond that, I think you have to again, it has to be specificity. It's hard to say, oh, quality of a Supergiant employee is this, that, or the other thing. It's like, it's, you know, position dependent. It's the type of work we're looking for. It's just, it changes so much depending on where we are. So we hire so rarely that, you know, sometimes people ask, you know, what's your hiring process? And it's like, we don't have one, because we kind of reinvent it every time we kind of, you know, we have hiring rituals, like we have a way we like to do it, but we don't have a hiring process because each position is a little bit unique. So each position, we're sitting there and asking ourselves, what do we need? Because it's usually a thing that someone has done here at the studio, but now we need more help doing it in a specialized way, or it's something new that we haven't done, and then we think about it a little bit differently. Back to the small group of us on Bastion, I think part of what we're doing is seeing, does that collaborative chemistry work with a group of people, with a bigger group of people? And for us, bigger is, you know, when we went from 7 to 12 on Transistor and Pyre, and then, you know, 12 to 17, or I think we're 19 now on Hades. So can we, as people who have this chemistry and have this shared respect and trust, and who get excited by each other's work, can we grow that a bit? And I think the answer to us on Hades was yes, we can. When we include these voices, and if we include them in a deliberate and slow way, they can help us make a game that we couldn't have done otherwise, and that they can come and be part of the fabric of what we do. So I can say that the overwhelming feeling there is, it's really hard to say how do you select for that, but I think it's more clear how you know that it's worked, which is down the line, you look back and you say, I don't know how we would have done that without them. And everyone who worked on Hades, I can say that for sure. And so it's one of those things where, you know what it feels like when you get it right, but it's really hard to say, for me at least, oh, it's these qualities or these traits that we select for and that create good chemistry here. It's sort of unique in every case.
Would you say this was a trait that you always had, being a people person, understanding people, or was this something that you kind of learned throughout the years and as you worked? Because usually game developers are either gamers, introverts, they're very geeky style, not very much into, you know, thinking about people, thinking about leadership, thinking about who's the best teammate. But what was your story?
So I guess for me, it comes back to, I've always had a really close group of friends, and actually Darren is one of those friends, you know, people I've played D&D with since I was really, really young, and I still play D&D with them, you know, on every week. That group of friends was really, really vital to my whole life and experience. And so I think I've always been someone who's been really, really attached to small groups, and, you know, to some of those D&D concepts, like you know, party balance and a mixture of personalities and a mixture of classes and a mixture of ideas and things like that. And so for me, I wouldn't say like, oh, I have a trait or a talent, or I can see something that makes it work. It's more that I have a lot of practice with being in a small group and having that define you. And I think what's so amazing about that friendship is not just the depth of the love we all have for each other and how much, we hang out, and even that I was able to, I work with Darren and, I work with Logan and all this kind of thing. But also that, that it sort of evolves, that it survives growth. People change a lot over time. You change a lot since you were, 8 years old. But in every era, the friendship worked and made sense. When we were in high school, it made sense. When we were in college and we weren't all living in the same place, it made sense. When we became adults, it made sense. And, now some of us have kids and long-term relationships, and it made sense. And, now even with separation through the pandemic, it makes sense and it works. And so that type of survival through evolution is also similar to Supergiant. I would say we're pretty different people than we were when we started the company, and it still works and makes sense. Why I don't know, or how I don't know, but it does.
You were always lucky with the perception dice, huh?
Yes, right. with the check there. Yeah.
Amir, do you ever miss doing more creative work? Usually when indie teams form their teams, the leaders, they will have to do a lot of other things, but sometimes they are not usually interested in those other things. But some of them find new joy in doing other things, dealing with people, being a leader. How about you? Do you miss doing more creative work, or are you very satisfied with what you're doing?
No, I'm very happy. Part of it is because I still do a lot of that work, right? I still do design work. I still work on the game directly, and I still, change numbers and adjust traits and, smash things together and experiment with stuff in the game too. So I feel still very connected to the creative work. And for me, a lot of what I think about with some of this stuff is these things that we consider in conflict. Is there a way that we can consider them actually just like as part of one thing, or part of a whole? So design work is creative. There's no question that it's creative. It can occupy your mind, and you can come up with lots of ideas, and you can be working on design problems in the background. And sometimes it's a grind, and you just try stuff and try stuff and try stuff. And sometimes it feels like you do have those aha moments where it's like, oh, this is the way into this idea. You play something and you say, this is the way into that idea. But I don't think leadership or management responsibilities have to be some other thing that doesn't feel creative and doesn't feel interesting and doesn't feel compelling and doesn't necessarily use the same parts. I think that we sometimes feel that we're being pulled away from the work that we were called to do, or that we got into this for, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It can be true that it's part of your growth, or your path or something, that it includes more of these other things and less of the first thing. Now, it doesn't mean that some people don't miss doing more of the work that they used to do, or any of those types of things. I think it's completely natural. Me personally, I don't necessarily feel that way, because I don't feel like I've been pulled off of the thing really that I was called to do. I think I've actually specialized more and more and more into the thing that I'm good at, and discovered what that is, which is more on the game tuning, game feel, how many invulnerability frames does our dash give you type of work. And alongside, using that same perspective and same point of view to make sure that we're collaborating well together and growing well together, and that we're all headed down a path together that works for everyone on the team.
Are you also a good manager with budgeting, times, tasks, those kind of things?
Yeah. So again, that's where it's really good that I have, I was a literature major. So, so it's really, really, really good that, Supergiant has Gavin Simon, our co-founder and development director, and Andrew Wang, our technical director. They do more of that type of work of figuring that out. But it's the type of thing where the leadership body at Supergiant is a collaborative group that has, our creative point of view, our artistic point of view, our technical point of view. So it represents what a game team is. It represents what makes a good game, which is all these perspectives, and then it's that in the leadership also. And so yeah, a lot of the other parts of this, like budgeting and finances and operational stuff, is more learned stuff. It isn't like something that we had a ton of practice doing necessarily before, but it's also quite straightforward. The goal of budgeting is to not run out of money before the project ships. So there's some sort of, those things are almost simpler than, or at least seem simpler to me than some of the, for a really small team, than some of the things you end up having to figure out on the game or those types of things. So yeah, I don't know. I would say that, we get that stuff done kind of as a group, and we figure it out as a group.
Mm-hmm. So you have help in your party to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So, Amir, the games at Supergiant that you guys have published, have created and released, have all had a very good balance between creativity, and on the other side, you have always delivered almost in every 3 years, almost, right? Maybe a little bit less than that sometimes, but you have delivered. So you have been very productive, and you have had creativity. And this is maybe one of the biggest challenges in game development in general: creativity and productivity. How can you balance them? How might one of them not sacrifice, or maybe you don't have to sacrifice one for the other? How do you go about this? What is your idea about this topic in making games, and what was Supergiant's magic for doing this?
Yeah, I mean, every game has been so different from each other. So I don't know if there's something that I'm trying to see if there's a theme. The thing I would say is, we did have games that had really long exploratory pre-production, like, Transistor and Pyre both had pre-production periods that were over a year, where we're trying to figure out the game and trying to figure out what the play was and what the aesthetic was and what the character was. And they had these long processes where we slowly worked our way to those answers. Something like Hades had like a 9-month pre-production, because it was defined, more of that was sort of defined up front, and there was less exploratory, there was stuff to figure out and stuff to find out. It just could be done in a faster and more economical way. So each of our games has had a different contour in terms of how long has pre-production been, how long has production been, how long has, only Hades had early access. So how long was our early access period, right? So I think for us, we look at them all pretty differently. I would say that the key value that helps us guide a lot of this is that we really do try to embrace the constraints that we have, and the constraints we have as a small team. And we try to follow our own rules on a lot of this stuff, so that we stay on track. It usually means that we get into a rhythm, and we follow that rhythm, and we follow the rules we set for ourselves. We're our own publishers, so it's only us telling us that something has to be ready at a certain time, or should be ready at a certain time, or those types of things. But we look at, those types of deadlines that one might set for themselves. It's a type of creative mercy, because it lets you ask yourself a hard question, which is, which of these things are working and which of these things aren't? Is the thing you're looking at really something that needs more time to reveal itself, or is it actually just had a bunch of chances to come together and it's not coming together? And we have to be, ideas are fragile, so you need to grow them over time, but you also need to be clear on your own work when you get to the point where you want to evaluate it. And we sort of set up those times for ourselves too, of like, hey, let's try and pull something together for this time, and at the rate we're going, that seems very realistic, and then let's ask ourselves a couple hard questions about it. and make sure that it's doing what we need it to do. You know, we have a lot of, we're very lucky because we have been able to self-fund our games and self-publish them. So the process I'm describing is possible because we don't have someone else telling us that it needs to be a certain way at a certain time. So I think what you're seeing is the combination of a small team that, you know, grew together over time, that learned how to embrace the constraints that the small team had, while also having a ton of independence and self-determination to figure those things out and to learn the hard way on some of those things and that kind of thing. And not every, you know, that's a rare thing. We're very lucky to have that. And so, you know, we're able to have self-fund the first project and have every project fund the next one. So it's really fortunate and really rare to be in that position. And we feel very lucky that we were able to do that, basically. And yeah, I mean, you know, how we make the decisions on, you know, how long should pre-production be or how long should production be and all that kind of stuff. It's all a response to the last thing we did in a lot of ways. We try and look at the learning from the last thing and say, what did we learn? How do we want to change it? Or, you know, because this new game is a certain way, how does it need to change? And so we just figure that out together.
Do you follow a strict pre-production process where after that you say, okay, we have started production now, no more new ideas? Is it like that, or?
No, it's not. It's not really like that. Like again, it's different for every game. Transistor and Pyre, they had a pre-production that finished with like a level that, and same with Bastion actually, that was shown at PAX. You know, it's like 20 or 25 minutes of gameplay or something like that, and then we still had to make the rest of it. So it had a full sort of finished feeling thing. And that was kind of the process for those games. On Hades is really different. On Hades, because of the roguelike structure and because of early access, our pre-production was used to answer a bunch of questions about the tone in the world and the systems and how exactly we were going to structure our room-to-room roguelike. And with those questions answered, we moved quite quickly into production and then quite quickly into our early access. So it was 15 months from ideation to early access, basically, for Hades. And that is shorter than the pre-production periods for the previous two games. So it shows that there isn't really like a process or a timeline or something that we can say, like, this is the formula for us. It was structured based on what we were trying to achieve in our pre-production. And so, you know, looking back on it, it's less that it's highly structured. I think more it's like, you know, pre-production is some mix of like creativity and honesty, right? Like the type of work you need to do to find the things you need to find and find the answers to the big questions you have, while also being honest on if you found them or not. Because then you have to make the rest of it during production. At least that's the case for us. And in Hades' case, we had to make the rest of it during production and then in early access. And many ideas happened during our early access. Like the whole structure for the end game and weapon aspects were not anticipated as part of Hades' design when we started it, but it became very important to Hades' design when we came time to structure the end game and iterate on the Pact of Punishment. Many ideas that were in Hades were anticipated before early access began, including, you know, things like what we imagined the ending would be and all these other types of components and some of the Olympians we were going to include and stuff like that. But early access did adjust our plans, like it reordered them in some cases. And over the course of the early access, we did come up with ideas that I don't think we ever would have done had we not seen how people were playing the game and how deeply they were playing it. And suddenly we knew we could do things like introduce big systems in the game, like quite deep into the game, and people would actually find them. That would have been probably too bold of a decision for us at the start of our early access, because we didn't know how much people were going to play it or how deeply they would play it or how that loop would feel. And so early access really did change our process a lot. And there were definitely ideas that came up over the course of the early access.
So on this topic, continuing on this topic, decision making is really important, and a good game development studio makes probably great games because of all those small decisions that are made on a daily basis. To those that are listening to you, what is your suggestion for a team for making the proper decisions for their games? How would you say, what are the important factors? What has worked for you guys?
Yeah, so I can speak to I can speak to what we do or what works for us, which is for us, like I said earlier, we're a very problem-solving oriented team. So we are very good at collaboratively solving problems, which means it's really, really good to end up having a set of well understood, agreed upon problems before you start solving them, even if you suspect you have a solution. And a lot of creative ideas are actually the kind of the solution before the problem. But it's one of those, and those can be great too. It's not that those have no value; those are valuable too. It's just one of those things where, at least when it comes to the design and gameplay components, we really view ourselves as problem solving. So this goes back all the way to our early history. Like with Bastion, for example, we wanted an isometric game where there wasn't a mini map on the screen all the time, because there's something about navigation in those isometric games that felt like you just always had the map open, or you always had the map open at double size so you could tell where you were. And that is what gave rise to, Bastion taking place in a destroyed world where the land would come up as you started walking. And that was an idea I believe that Gavin had. And we tried it, and it solved that problem and introduced new ones, and then we solved those problems. And so it was, it was an example of our sort of loop of iteration and problem solving in a creative way. And for us, that's part of what anchors us in the universe of the game we're making. We also tend to do almost everything in game. There isn't like long, elaborate documentation about how everything is going to come together and work together. And so that really helps if you have a problem-solving perspective, because you can look at the problem together in the video game that you have, whether it's with gray box art or whatever. And so, we start making stuff, and we start solving problems, and we come to new problems, and we start solving those, and we iterate on our solutions, and we know what solutions we've tried. We look at what other games might be doing who have solved similar problems, and we just kind of build and build and build from there. Sorry about that. I'm not saying that every team should be problem solving focused or anything like that. That's actually just that's just sort of what our DNA has been. I think that there are lots of good ways to come up with good game designs that are not this, and to come up with good systems and good creative work that are not this. This is just the way that we've tended to do it.
Great. Amir, you mentioned you have never had any formal leadership training or management training, right? But have you ever had good mentors that you really learned from and you had interactions with to these kind of things?
Yeah, I have. And, I've definitely been proactive in trying to improve my leadership in different ways. The starting point for me is that I did have really good leaders. I had a leader at EA, is a executive producer who later became the GM of the studio, Mike Verdu, who's always been very kind since I started my Supergiant journey to sort of, give me context. He's someone who always led kind of with compassion and with honesty and directness. And I often, I really valued that. I actually don't think I necessarily have a similar style or anything to Mike, but I just always found the way he listened and the way he was direct and honest, while also being kind of empathetic, to be like a almost shocking set of traits. It's really, really rare that you can have someone who combines kindness and directness. It's a type of thing that I think is like really, really, really strong as a set of traits, especially for a big team like we were. So yeah, I think about, Mike Verdu. I had a manager named Ofer Esslin, who was one of my managers at EA, and I had other great managers at EA too, who spent a lot of time in our one-on-ones helping me collaborate better with the people I was working with. And I think a big part of that is just, when you first enter any team, knowing how it works, knowing how it's structured, knowing how people are supposed to work together, that's just something that is really, really important. And so and then I was surrounded, those leaders, there was tons of great producers there, Amir Rao and Greg Savin, who ended up over at EA, and just different people there who showed different leadership skills, I would say, and different like ways of doing it. And Jill McDonald and some others too. I worked very briefly with Shannon Studstill, who was the studio director at Sony Santa Monica for many years on the God of War franchise and stuff like that. And so, it's just one of those things where they all had a different style and they all did it in a different way. They all had a different set of qualities and traits, but were all very memorable for me, at least, to see how they thought about things and how they did things. They're just, as leaders, they all were a type of inspiration for me, for sure. Even when I really felt and still feel today that I can't do some of those things, it's just good to know that they could be done. Someone could do them, and that's a nice feeling too.
At least you know it. Would you say it's a good idea for indie teams to have some prior industry experience in larger teams first? Because this is a question many teams have.
I mean, I don't think it's necessary. It will give you a point of view that's like, the point of view a lot of us have from Supergiant, which is, what is it like to work on a big team, and then what is it like to work on a small team? That isn't a necessary point of view, I don't think. There are so many great games that were made by people making projects either by themselves or in a small group or whatever, who have never worked on a giant team, and the stuff is amazing. So I would say there's definitely no formula prescription there. I would never tell someone, oh, you should take a certain path, or you should take our path, or whatever. We started Supergiant so long ago. It was in 2009. The whole industry and the landscape of everything was very, very different than it is today. And so, it's one of those things where, it'd be really hard to say, do this or do that, or you should do this or you should do that. Because it feels almost like there are more paths than ever that one could take. But it also, seems as competitive as it's ever been and as hard as it's ever been. So it's just a combination of the next great teams and the next great games from developers we've never heard of. They're definitely not all going to take the same road there.
Sure. So if you go back and meet the 18-year-old Amir, what will you tell him today?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I was, I'm pretty happy with, obviously, how things are going and how things are turned out and all of this type of thing. Certainly, there's a lot of learning that had to happen over time. So I don't know that I would. I don't know that I have a piece of advice would sort of let 18-year-old me figure out all the things that I had to figure out, because it was part of my path and my journey to get to where I am.
So what is your advice for those who are just going to start, or those who are going to be new leaders, aspiring leaders? What should they expect?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is what is so great about now is that there are so many ways to get started. Whether you want to work on a specific craft or whether you want to make a whole game yourself, there's so many tools out there and kind of tutorials and videos and instruction and examples of ways to get going on games. And so what's so good about that is, if you think about it from a learning perspective, it means that you can learn in a month or a year if game development, if the making of games is a hobby for you, or is a calling for you, or is a job for you, or is, or somewhere in the middle of all this, and what parts of that might be appealing to you, whether you're very young or you're making a switch from another career or any of those types of things. I think that's what's so great about now, is there's just a lot of ways to get started in a lot of different areas. And so, one of the things I would say that Hades was built on is, like, as a team, we felt like we had learned over the previous 3 games what we are good at and what we can do really well. And so Hades is the expression of a lot of the things that we're very good at as a team, or that we've learned stuff about as a team. I feel like that learning process for any individual could start as soon as they feel sort of emotionally prepared and have time to begin trying stuff, and to see where they might fit in games, and take the next step from learning about themselves and what they're engaged with and what they like to do in it and the types of things they like to make, to can they find like-minded people, and then suddenly you have a team, and on you go.
Mm-hmm. Amir, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. It was great talking to you. Do you have any final comments?
No, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I mean, it's great to reflect on these topics and to think about them more. And I appreciate your thoughtfulness in all the questions. And this is clearly a subject. This is clearly a subject that you think about a lot. So I appreciated the opportunity to reflect on all that stuff with you.
Amir Rao, thank you very much for being on this program. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Have a great day.
Thank you.